So my name is Eva Pascoe. I came to UK about 1986 to start working within the internet industry. During my PhD, I discovered that what I really wanted to do is to spend the next 20 years of my life doing internet. Not. So we're about 1994, just about where the browser technology started coming out of the labs. I had the privilege of meeting another like-minded few people who decided to do the first internet cafe. And that was at the time before anybody had internet at home. There was an internet provider called Demon, where a few dedicated geeks had very squeaky, very slow connectivity from home, but there wasn't anything like that on the high street. So we decided to open one up. Just on the back of Good Street Station on Whitfield Street, and luckily it ended up being pretty much close to Saatchi's, O&M, and all the big advertising agencies who realized that this is a new medium and helped us out in building it together for everybody. But just to contextualize where the internet is today and where it came from, the tools we had then were really rubbish. So I'm not sure if I really knew what we were doing, because the context of the tooling, if you look at Eudora, Mosaic, and FTP, they were not just very basic, they didn't work very well. Everything was crashing all the time. You put in beautiful love letter to your boyfriend, and halfway through the sending it would disappear. So it was extremely annoying. But we had this idea that somehow through, despite the fact that we all looked pretty ugly, big computers, lots of sound of coffee, people slurping, it was quite a difficult environment to work. But we knew that people were into connectivity. They wanted to talk to each other, they wanted to send emails. And it was all a little bit ropey. We didn't have a coffee machine. When we opened, we thought that it would be just a training center. I was interested in training center for women, because that was my sort of cyber feminist interest. We were reading Sadie Plant and Donna Haraway, and we wanted to train women. But what happened after the first day, we had 3 line deep around the Siberia, but they were all men. So that was a business plan that had to be revised pretty quickly. We also didn't have a proper coffee machine, so we ran out to Bar Italia, which was the only coffee shop in London at that time which had a real coffee. And we begged them for advice where to get a real coffee machine. So actually thinking about it, we're about 6-7 years before Starbucks, many years before Costa, but instead of running with the coffee shop business, we ran with the internet business, because that was much more fun. So that was one of the business plans that we should have read properly. But it also was, after Siberia, I moved on to Topshop, but the linking between both was cryptography. Because the reason why we managed to get Siberia on the road, and if you look at the tools, they all had very little privacy at that time. But we did understand quite well that people wouldn't be using email in public space, entering the details of intimate family conversations if they didn't trust us. So the trust in the email, in the banking details, in the public space, looking after your data was absolutely core to Siberia values. I remember spending hours and hours after the closing time, clearing everything up, making sure that nobody details were left. And we came from the cyberpunk community, so privacy was not secrecy. Privacy was something to be respected because it had a business point. So when I moved then to Topshop to start the Topshop Ecommerce, about 1998, I think, 96, we started looking at introducing SSL, because before you couldn't really properly shop online. It wasn't safe. So it coincided with the fact that cryptography has moved forward, and from being kind of slightly underground movement of crazy libertarians in the US, it became a business tool. It enabled us to do what we do today. It enabled us to do e-commerce. And a lot of people forget it, that privacy actually enabled business. Privacy and security enabled what many of us do for a living today. So they are not mutually exclusive, and that's, I think, one of the myths we need to clarify. They are not mutually exclusive. Privacy underlines all the businesses we're in today. It's just at some point forked off slightly wrong way. So I remember the conversations with many, many conversations where we're setting up initial Topshop, where the banks were not quite sure what we're supposed to be doing, but we all understood that the privacy security was fundamental. And I didn't have to argue at all with Philip Green about us not selling data, about us not passing data to third parties, because long-term, companies that have been around for a long time have the notion of trust built in the DNA. If you look at the traditional retail company, pretty much nobody passes on data to third party. Why would they? Why would they? You don't need to do that. You're better off investing in your trust within you and your customer and building that trust and holding onto the data, looking after it, not letting it leak. So we were pretty much in the same space because traditional retail does not sell data to other parties. What happened after was the new retail, people who didn't understand that situation started doing different things and it probably ended up wrong. So within all the structure of Topshop, we actually had a very supportive environment to continue working towards improved privacy. When it was sort of really went wrong was the cookie wars. So how many of you remember the cookie wars? Right, so that was about time when Netscape emerged, and Netscape was the second version of Mosaic. But Netscape was Mark Anderson, who came from very different culture. He wasn't a cryptographer, he wasn't a cyberpunk, he was into to make money. And they grabbed the idea of cookies. But you have to remember that cookies were good, because cookies is what allows you to maintain the e-commerce session. So the good cookies were, again, the pillar of the foundation of how e-commerce actually works. Where it kind of went straight off-road is when the bad cookies showed up. So the bad cookies are the third-party cookies who track you. So how many people are aware of their tracking when they enter new e-commerce websites? Probably very few, but you're being tracked by at least 20, 30, 50 third parties. So we, all the way through from 1997, with the Internet Engineering Task Force, argued that we can't do that because that will break the trust. That at some point will end up with the data leaking up the wrong direction. However, Netscape at that time was beginning to be quite powerful, and they just overran it. That was first time when the recommendation from Internet Engineering Task Force was overridden. And we thought, okay, this is going wrong, because long term, it was going to be a big disaster. We knew that. But at that point, it was the upper hand was emerging from private equity. And private equity were really thick. And they still are, because they don't understand that to build a business, it's not about your first 6 months, it's about the brand. And it takes about 3 to 4 years to 5 years to build the brand. And that's where we started going wrong. So we fought that war, we lost it, but I think EU has slowly started understanding that this needs to be reined in. So if you are in advertising industry, you will have seen the over-reliance on cookies and people forgetting how to actually run business without them. So then we got up to, the situation was slowly worsening when Gmail launched in 2004 and didn't tell anybody that they were reading the emails. Eric Schmidt has commented on it. Google gets right up to creepy and starts just before it. And I kind of thought, right, so whose definition of creepy are we talking about here? Because his definition of creepy was very different than ours. So they basically, Google built a business model on reading email. And at that point, the advertising industry has figured out that the semantic understanding of your email allows them to personalize the advertising, which was going to offer you better value, but did it? So what happened? Meanwhile, we started increasing our self-input of data. So if you look at any post on Facebook, particularly if it's a post from your holidays in wherever it was, I think Mexico, the moment you send that post, how many data points you trigger? Do you have any idea? Any post, it's more than 10. So your age, your income, because somebody say, you didn't quite catch a bus there, you had to fly, your geolocation, your gender, the way you changed money while you got there, your travel insurance. There's absolutely an infinite number of data points you can derive from each picture. If it's a picture of your family, that multiplies by the factor of 10. If it's a picture of you with a friend, again, it multiplies. So any of your photographs generate enormous amount of data. And the companies are getting more and more of it, because if you look at the graph, how many hours we actually spend online. Interestingly enough, on the PC, we don't spend that much more time. The moment we finish work, off we go. But the green bit is the time spent on mobiles. And that is pretty staggering now. Apparently, we spend more time on the screens than we sleep. And that actually has even progressed further. We sleep less and less, so we are taking time away from sleeping. Maybe we all, like Margaret Thatcher, can survive on 4 hours per day, but I'm not entirely convinced about that. So all these hours that we are online, we're not just doing nothing. We're not just staring at it. We're entering our data all the time. The data goes in. Every time you do something online, the data goes in. So what happens now, what made it even harder was that, when we started, there wasn't really any threat of working with data too much, because it was all in the tiny floppy disk, which could help, a couple of names and little programming basic, and that was it. But when we started moving to the cloud, the storage has suddenly become so cheap and so available that anybody can store enormous amount of data for almost nothing. I mean, even last week, I do a little bit of work with Wikipedia, and I heard somebody requesting, can I have a dump of Wikipedia because I want to trial some things? And you kind of think, oh my God. It would have been a lot of floppy disks if you had to do it the old way. But so it's great in many ways, but it's not so great in other ways, because that basic triggered surveillance. So before, when we were on the floppy disks, nobody could really get that easily access to your data, because it was physically impossible or hard. When we moved to cloud, everything is there. Everything is there. So obviously at that point, the companies that were interested in surveillance and in commercial surveillance are going, Christmas. So when you look at the cloud, it's not insecure. It can be secure, but quite often is insecure, because people are still learning how to do it well. And it's just available to way too many people. Oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. So what we're doing today, we're just humans feeding machines all the time. Every minute of the day, something gets shoveled in. And we have about 4 points where it's coming to the critical situation. So obviously massive increase in delta self-input, so us adding things on social networks, adding bits of us, but also the drones, which are kind of useful, but also add massive amount of data about us. There's a number of people now in London who have licenses to fly over built-in areas, so you will be seeing that more and more. And they are professional people, they have license to do it, but imagine how much data is being gathered if you do one little flight over Oxford Street. Wearables, geolocation became a norm in data gathering. But one thing which people are not quite aware of, how much cash has dropped. And drop of cash means every transaction is now recorded. So over last year, since contactless came through, about 20% of transactions came from cash to contactless. That became data. So not only your data on credit cards is being gathered, but also the little things that you were doing before in, £10 here, £5 there, that all became data as well. So, and it's progressing, because obviously with Apple Pay and with increase of cashless from 20 to 30 pounds, retailers love it, because the cost of carrying cash for retail is enormous. So the moment they can get rid of cash, they will love it. And we just have to think about the implications, because yes, it's convenient, but who owns your identity of your money? Who owns your transactions? A whole lot of new people emerging, and obviously algorithms. When I started, AI was really difficult and actually really unproductive. We spent ages trying to come up with some new way of modeling how people think and uncovering semantics of the language. It was a complete waste of time. So that was one of the reasons I moved out of academia. But now the algorithms are really good, and they are getting better than you. They're definitely getting rid of quite a few jobs, hopefully not yours, but have a think. And with cheap storage and great algorithm, there is nothing stopping AI from really making a qualitative jump over the next year or two. At the moment, it's all feeding commercial state surveillance. Could we do something good with it? But meanwhile, while we're trying to do something good, there is more stuff coming out. And one thing which I discussed with my friends in Asia, I do quite a lot of trips to Asia, where there's no expectation of data privacy at all. Culturally, Asia has got no concept of human rights, but also no concept of data protection. So when Samsung came out with that TV that was listening to your conversations in the living room, and everybody complained, Samsung was very surprised. So nobody complained in Asia. What's the problem? Because nobody complained in Asia, because they were not concerned, because they don't expect anything else. Not just Korea, because obviously Samsung is Korea, so whatever they do, the government loves it. But as a culture, it's a much more collective culture, which has got a sense of resignation in a way, because they never had any options. So we are getting handsets, televisions, consoles from a culture which is devoid of any sense of privacy and does business in a very different way. And then on top of it, they came up with selfie stick. Hey, again, increasing the number of data sets, because now if you look at the selfies with selfie stick, how many people are in the selfie now? At least 2. So that's doubling the data input, doubling the information of facial recognition. That's doubling or tripling the amount of data that Google will get into the facial recognition system. Wow, that just increased the speed of AI development by probably another 10 years. So where are we with all this? Very good survey came out just recently from Annenberg Research Institute. They've asked the internet users, if companies give me a discount, is it a fair exchange for them to collect information about me without me knowing it? And 91% of people said that they were not happy with it. So that sort of explodes a little bit of this notion that, yeah, people don't really care about privacy. It's fine. It's not fine. People are just resigned, but that doesn't mean it's fine. And we're trying to unpack it at the moment, so we'll talk a little bit about it on the next session. But, if something walks like a duck, looks like a duck, it's a duck. Gathering people information with giving them terms and conditions of 50 pages is wrong, and we know it's wrong. So let's just get it out in the open now. So if we look at what's wrong and what could be made right, it's just answering a few questions. When we did consultancy on it, on what people are concerned about, it's really quite straightforward. Who gets my data? How much is it worth to me? How much they make of me? Can I revoke my permissions? How do I allow my permissions based on time, place, and request changes? These are simple questions. This is not rocket science, honestly. So we did a project where we allowed people to give permission for data use for specific location. So let's say that we are in Hampstead High Street or Notting Hill High Street, you shop, and within 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock when you shop, you are open for location-based iBeacon information about the deals. Fine. But you say, but can I revoke them after? Can I finish my openness after time I'm done with shopping? And we said, well, no, because that's not the way it works at the moment. But if we had a way it worked, they'd be very happy to do it. And, honestly, technically, it's not that hard. It's just the culture is wrong. So then we bumped into Tim Berners-Lee, who has got a big campaign. I think he was prompted to do it by Apple at some point, getting into very secret tracking of everything and not telling you that they're tracking and being just ridiculous. And also selling Facebook data, which at the moment, it's a big campaign. So what he's trying to achieve is digital Magna Carta for the age of the global networking. And he launched a bit last year in Web We Want Festival. All the principles of what people want to know were there. The only thing is that it didn't really go anywhere because it was global, because Tim is kind of global guy. So we thought, okay, it's all very well, but until it's made a bit more local, it's not going to happen. So we approached them to try to figure out how can we test the waters and see if we can improve the privacy and teach the business a little bit better about what is the context of data and everyday operation. And we did the consulting with World Wide Web, Web We Want Festival this year in South Bank. And we just wrote down the kind of 8 key tenets of Tim Berners-Lee Magna Carta ideas, what laws we need to sustain creative internet culture, to sustain the innovation in a safe way. And we got a lot of comments, and it was quite interesting that people have very deep sense of what's right and what's fair, And they don't mind sharing data, but they mind sharing data that goes off somewhere else. They mind sharing data knowing that it will probably get left on a laptop on a bus, as NHS tends to do. They mind sharing data if they know that the employee of the company shares passwords about everybody, including 5 cousins. So I think people have quite good grip on how insecure most of companies are. And I'm not talking about the cryptography, I'm talking about the risk culture in the companies. So most of retailers, if you go in, including Lloyd's, you have passwords on Post-it notes stuck on screens of the PCs, everywhere. Everywhere I go, I see that. So this is like level 1, and people know that. So they say, no, first of all, data ownership, because unless your people can be trusted, I'm not going to share it with anybody. My data is my data. And if you ask, if you want it, ask, which is Tim's line. But people have also very good notion of free and open software, which was quite interesting because that allows people to innovate without having to pay Adobe Photoshop a lot of money. So a lot of conversations were about the freedom of open software. But after the consultation, we're taking it to the parliament. We already did in March, but we're taking it in September to see how much of that can be flushed out in practice, because what we're trying to capture is the way internet works well. So why the cryptography and CryptoPunks wanted privacy, not secrecy, is because privacy is the trust that builds the business. And all the big brands that are about understand it, is the small, little, new, predominantly American brands that don't understand it. And it's beginning to come through, because if you look at what happened to Google Glass, nearly $1 billion investment, went wrong. They had to withdraw it. Why? Because they assumed that privacy was not an issue, that people don't care. And when you look at who can be overcome, how hard it is, but how successful people can be when they get together, it was wrong because there wasn't a clear way of dealing with privacy with Google Glass. I used it, I loved it, I really liked it, although it was very short use and the batteries were not quite sensible because 15 minutes is really not enough. But people rejected it, not because of usability, because of privacy. So this was sort of like a first quite big scale battle where the geeks got beaten up in the bars in San Francisco for wearing glass. It's bizarre, but that's how much the rejection frustration is happening. And we kind of only then understood that actually US doesn't have data protection rights in the way EU has. US has got something called consumer rights, which is very weak and is based on John Kennedy Consumer Act from 1968. But since then, it was watered down and watered down and watered down by lobbyists, by large catalog companies. So there's pretty much nothing left. So when they do something, it's like Samsung. They just think, well, there's no law, let's do it. While when they come to UK, it's like, ooh, this is different. And their first attempt is, let's break it. Let's teach the Europeans how to do business. And sooner or later, we're beginning to withdraw. But there's a very big difference between Asian, European, and American sense of data ownership. In EU, it's human rights. It's just not implemented properly. In America, non-existent. Asia, non-existent. So it really was not until Snowden showed up where the Americans started questioning where they are. And the questions were, even last week, there was a big conference on privacy scholars. Privacy scholars in San Francisco. You would know, they know everything about privacy. Halfway through the conference, I'm seeing this tweet. Is privacy a form of consumer protection or is it something else? And much confusion. I think it's something else. And then we realized how big gap there is between us, where after Germany, after the war, after the Nazis, after the Stasi, after the communism, how important privacy is and how important it is for the business. They only just understood that. It took Snowden to figure it out. So meanwhile, what did people do? People are not stupid. They figure out that actually, once Cameron surveillance, commercial surveillance is happening, there's another way of doing it. Emojis. So if you look at the numbers, you probably can see it, but 83% of us using emojis in our social communication. And okay, it's a bit of fun, but also it's being lost in surveillance. If you start using emojis, a friend of mine translated Casablanca in emojis. The whole Casablanca. So if you remember that one. But what about us? We will always have Paris. So it's an extremely rich language, and it's not just great for advertising, because people love emojis. when you put them in your email header. But it's really a way, a signifier that we want to be slightly hidden, we want to be a little bit less obvious, playful, but less visible. So there are ways of going about it. There is a big group in Italy who is working on figuring out how to really be constructive, because we don't want to be Luddites and just complain. We want to solve it. So imagine if you are posting something, your holiday snap from Mexico, you send it to the social network, and the moment, fuck knows what goes to happen with it. It can go anywhere. But if it's encrypted, and if you can run the social network on the basis of true privacy, you can put encryption one end, decryption for people who want to read it, and a whole layers of licenses that could allow you to share data with people who you really want to share. So I don't mind sharing data with my GP if I knew that he was secure and his cybersecurity was good. At the moment, I wouldn't even think about it. But if the cybersecurity was correct, I don't mind doing it because I know that my collaborative data sharing would be a benefit for me. So you just need to work out how we can implement it, and blockchain for privacy and reviewing these licenses on a real-time basis is probably where we're going to be with it. So what happened with that, a lot of work with the data, but we haven't prepared the tools to make it secure. But it is happening. So just to sort of get it to the point where we can formulate plan for the next few years. Privacy is a fundamental part of how business online works. It's got to be right, and we've got to get it back where it needs to be in order to allow the big brands to build trust and the small brands to earn trust. But when I think about what happened over the last 20 years, what was really big for me is not the private equity crazy stuff where they're looking for unicorns, but trying to get data. Data is new oil. I don't think data is new oil. Trust is new oil. Trust between consumer and the brand, user or people in the brand, is the new oil. But you've got to generate it, earn it, and look after it, because otherwise none of us will do any business. And over the last few years, the things which are best, the things which are true unicorns, were all collaborative, were all things we did together, things we shared. So for me, it's Wikipedia, open data, blockchain, none of this came anywhere near VCs. None of this came nowhere near private equity gambles. People just wanted to do it, so they did it. People want to work together to share and build, so they're doing it. And some of it creates great value, which is monetized. Some of it creates fundamentals for great value, which will be monetized in the longer term. But that's where the real unicorns are, because they're based on trust. So I'm hoping that within Nathalie's framework over the next period, we can find out how to help the business to understand that privacy, collaboration, and sharing is the core for where internet brings the golden eggs. Thank you. Right, I think we have a few minutes for Q&A, 10 minutes. Right, so if I wanted to start a conversation about your experiences of trust and how do you see data input today? So any questions first from you?
As parents, what sort of things should I be worried about with a 10-year-old child who loves being online?
As a parent, what do you need to do with a 10-year-old child who is online? Pray? Actually, interestingly, Tim Berners-Lee is campaigning as part of the Magna Carta, for something called iRights. So if you look at the website for iRights, there's quite a lot of tools, but also behavior monitoring. And the one that I love most, put the PC in the kitchen and don't let them do it on the mobile until they're well past 14. But that's highly unrealistic these days. I think the companies that are gathering data have got quite good sense of what under 16 is. But Facebook doesn't. Facebook does gather data of anybody who's there because you're not supposed to be on it until you're 14. Obviously, everybody's on it anyway. So at the moment, parents are pretty much on their own. And I think Tim has got quite a lot of hearing at the moment from the social networks. But at some stage, it went the wrong way. So they started creating these anonymous social networks, which were even worse. Because things like Ask FM, the kids ran with it and used it mainly for advanced cyberbullying, industrial level. And now they're beginning to withdraw. But being a parent at the moment, and I've got 3, 1 teenager, it's extremely difficult. But if you read iRights, there is a number of tools you can apply. And find my phone. Just make sure you know where they are.
Come on, guys, we're a smart group. No more questions about privacy.
You made a really good... Is this on? Hello.
Hello.
You made a really good point about people don't mind giving up data, but they want to know that it's not going to go any further, etc. But if you ask anyone, in my mind, lots of people say, oh, I'd happy to give up this data, but not that data. But you talked about machine learning, and then there's products like Google Now. And nowadays, there's so much good that these companies can do with this data, if they can draw parallels between it and things like wearables and health. So they can say, oh, you should go to the doctor because we've seen from this data and that data. How do we strike a balance between privacy and the good that the data can do if it is in the cloud and if we do give it to companies who can do some good with it?
It's absolutely the right question, because we all want to innovate. But I think the question is, we need to go back how internet was innovative for the first period. And it was because the assumption of privacy was there. And it just got eroded very slightly. Now people withdrawing back. So we're actually losing, it's a lose-lose situation. The company doesn't get it, people don't get the service, we are kind of not in a good spot. So even yesterday, I don't know if you've seen the announcement of Brigade, Sean Parker has launched a new social network specifically about campaigning about privacy. So it's a big deal. But as I explained over the consultations, a lot of people were assuming that we will solve it, that the granularity of privacy tools will be developed. So we can say, okay, I've got thyroid problem, so it's okay for people who are researching on it to gather my data, but it's not okay for the insurance company because I don't really want my insurance company to know about the state of my thyroid. And it's okay for my GP, but it's not okay for a private medical company who just might want to know. But we don't have these tools at the moment, but we know what they look like. And blockchain is probably part of the answer. So ODI, Open Data Institute, has just set up a cryptography and privacy team, because I think the answer is in granularity. Data comes from open to private, with everything in between. And we're kind of building like a matrix of really detailed understanding what data there is, what do we want to share, what we don't want to share, what we only want to share in a certain period of time in specific place. Because that would be ideal. We heard that a lot. People say, yeah, well, I don't mind sharing my data on the high street if I get good deals. I just don't want it to have them after. And at the moment, we just can't do it. So I think it's all about focusing on the tools of transparency. We heard transparency so many times. I just want to know where my data is. How much is it worth to you? What do I get in exchange? I'll give you an example. When I did Topshop, we had this kind of very simple system, 10% off for your data, and we use it, but we only use it internally, and you always get a discount on the Topshop card. Or you always get a discount on a Topman card. And that works very well, because people knew that it won't go anywhere else, and it didn't. Or Next. I know people who complain to Next that, why you show me items that are not my size? So it means that they're happy for you to know the size, which normally is quite private information. And also it's a complete nightmare, because women are never the same size. So this is, I won't go there. But people are happy to give it to Next, because they know it's not going to go any further, and it's only going to be used for Next. Thank you very much. So, but these companies have been around 70 years. They have it in their DNA that trust is what the brand is about. You get little apps that like, what is it? Just Nasty Girl, which is quite nice fashion, but the moment you give them the data, and I did that because I misspelled my name, because I just wanted to see what they do with it, it goes everywhere. So they're basically selling data. They're using clothes to elicit your data. I give them about a couple of years, but we are on the receiving end of this private equity funded nonsense, and meanwhile it's eroding trust into companies that mean well. So we're just trying to bridge that bit. So we maintain the notion of privacy and develop these tools as quickly as possible. Right, sorry.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you very much for your talk. I'm wondering...
No, go ahead. We have time.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what use you think there is in conceiving of trust with a big T, because you were mentioning that conceptions of trust are different in Asia, and there are even intergenerational different perceptions of trust. Teenagers conceive of trust online differently. They're very happy to give away their data if they know that they're getting something in return. So what use do you think a Magna Carta of Trust Bill of Rights would be of use online? Thank you.
That's a great question. We know there are big cultural differences, and we know there are big age differences. But what we also know that, because we tracked it over enough time now, that kids are not stupid. It's not that they trust the system, they don't trust the system at all, because they have been enough in trouble in school for a word or two on social media. They know very well. So they are the ones who are going to Telegram. They are the ones who are kind of sliding off into more secure networks. But everybody wants transparency and trust. And that needs tools. If you can say who can use your data, who can't, and for how long, I think we will get granularity that will suit everybody. At the moment, Asia and US haven't had it because they didn't have the right structure, the law structure to underpin it. But it's going that way. Tim Cook said already last week that Apple is not going to sell people, Apple is going to sell products. And that's a big difference.
Hi. You mentioned algorithms earlier. If you put those with metadata, how does that affect Magna Carta? Because metadata I don't have control over, but with a good algorithm, I can get just as much about you from your metadata as I can from your private data.
Yes, the technology is moving faster than anybody has realized, and the challenge to cryptographers is to stay ahead of that. And how to hold your data, how to process your data, to stop re-anonymization, it's a massive challenge. But I think now the understanding is emerging that it has to be solved, because...
But your metadata isn't yours. That's the point. None of this would apply. The metadata about where your phone is every second. You don't control that.
No, but we have to work out a legal system where people see the control of that residing. So one example we tried was to look at you giving your data to your local community. I think it's the first trials were in Spain, where they ran a small town, where everybody just chucked all the data to one pot with the mayor. And the mayor had the encryption, the protection, the legal framework for that data to be used. As far as I could see, it's thriving, because obviously the more data we share, the more value we generate for ourselves. I mean, the beautiful example is when you look at Airbnb versus Daily Mail. I really love that, because before Airbnb, you would never allow any strangers into your house. It just wouldn't. And if you have children, no way. But it's because we read Daily Mail, Daily Telegraph, FT, it's all scaremongering, and everybody's terrible, and humanity is rotting and decaying. When you actually look at the reality, most people are good, and most people mean well. So things like sharing trust with Airbnb just really nicely flashed out that we're actually quite nice people. And we're not going to rape our host and steal, well, I know people who had jeans stolen, but nothing major. So I think one upside of all this collaborative sharing economy, which has issues, but one upside is that, it broke through Daily Mail. It broke through the fear. And I know women who use kind of Airbnb type of babysitting service, where they actually get babysitters from a shared reputation up. And you can be like 5 years ago, it would be unthinkable. But when you see the reputations, you think, these people are fine, most people are fine. Okay, you're running a little bit of a small risk, but the reputation system online works very well, and it's cheaper, so we all benefit. So I think people really get it. that the more we share, the more value it is. But it's just what happens to the data, how to make it transparent, how to make it only available for them and not for the rest of the universe that we don't even know. But I think the answer is cryptography, but then I would say that because I'm a cypherpunk.
Thank you very much, Eva, for that.
Thank you. Thank you.